Hello and welcome to Social Church. We're really excited to be recording the testimony of Debbie Flood today. Many of you will know Debbie as a successful Olympian, silver medal winning rower from the Olympic Games in 2004 and 2008, as well as being a brilliant member of the Christians in Sport community. I can't wait to hear this. Over to you, Debbie.
Hi, this is Debbie Flood, and it's a real privilege to be sharing my testimony with you today. I want to share with you my journey and my testimony of sport and faith, both painting a picture of what life as a sports person is like, but most importantly, how as a Christian I've come to see that my sport and faith are not separate, that being a Christian changes our identity, and whatever our life looks like, God wants to be central in that. So my path hasn't always been a clear one, and caring of consequences at a young age. I was always in trouble. A compulsive liar, walking out of school, fighting with the boys, flooding the school toilets, and being taken to the police station for shoplifting, all before the age of 7, to name a few. At this point, I thank God that my family began to rally around me to help me back on the right path, and I know that their prayers for me were also key in that time. Now, each of us are individuals with our own journeys and stories, and I believe that each one of us are created by God with purpose and with skills and talents. And for me, as a youngster, I knew this was sport. And so therefore, I was particularly encouraged in this kind of troubled time to direct my focus and energy into sport. And I absolutely loved sport. I remember watching the Olympics on the TV with my dad and thinking, wow, they are superhuman, almost another world away. It was on the telly. It was something I couldn't really reach. But, I was also passionate about sport. I loved it. So I began to wonder if I could ever be able to be that good, maybe representing my school and then going on to county, and then who knows where that might lead. But really, as a youngster, thinking about being on TV and representing my country seemed a crazy thought. But my dad encouraged me just to take one step at a time, to work hard and to be encouraged by my baby steps, and that if I never tried, that I would never know. So I tried a few different sports. Running was my first love. I loved running with my dad. Then I got involved in shot put at school. I went to a school in quite a rough area, so my parents were keen that we could look after ourselves, myself and my brother, so I took up judo as well. But I was really competitive in all the sports I did. I wanted to compete, and actually ended up in the junior British judo team for a short while. And actually, as part of our training, we used the rowing machine. That's how rowing all started, really. Used the rowing machine for fitness. And someone came up to me in the gym and said, "Oh, are you a rower?" And I kind of said, "No, what's rowing?" I grew up in Yorkshire, not renowned for its long, straight rivers. It's more rapids than bends. My school didn't row. Rowing really wasn't that much in the public eye at that point. So I kind of thought, what are you talking about? And they said, "Oh, you are really good on the rowing machine." So I thought, I wonder if this could be my new sport. I definitely had potential and was strong on the rowing machine. But I was hopeless on the water. Little did I know how technically difficult it was. I pretty much spent my first week swimming because I fell in so much. I just couldn't pick it up. I was trying so hard. But after about 5 months of not really improving, one of the coaches came up to me and said, "Look, Debbie, you're doing your A-levels at the moment. I know you're working hard at school, but I don't want you to waste your time. You're not really going to be a good enough rower to, you're not really going to be more than an average club rower." Gutted. For me as a youngster, for that Olympic dreams, to be told that I wasn't going to be good enough was just gutting. My dreams and goals kind of shot down a bit in that moment. But just as I was about to give up as that 17-year-old, God graciously placed a different coach in my path. Too long a story to include today, but in short, I was introduced to the chief coach of the Great Britain junior squad, and he decided to take me on. Now, this is something that never happens, which is why I can definitely say God graciously placed him in my path. It never happens. I was a nobody in rowing, coming last by minutes at junior trials, and he would normally coach the best people, the top people who are already winning things, and he would take them to the World Championship. But for some reason, he invited me to a GB training camp in Spain for the junior team, And there was uproar amongst the coaches. So Mark, my new coach, received so much backlash, and everyone thought he'd lost the plot. But he persevered with me, and I started to improve. In fact, I ended up that year making the Junior World Championship team, which was a mini miracle in itself, really. And I was off. That was my Olympic dreams in sight. And that was really the start for me when I was a 17-year-old. And, I had a life plan. We all make life plans, don't we? And my life plan, now I'd finished my A-levels, was to train full-time for 2 years as a rower and then become a veterinary surgeon. I grew up in James Herrick country, so nothing else could have been better. I had decided I knew exactly what was best for me. So I moved away from Yorkshire, moved down south because that's where I needed to be for the rowing. And I trained full-time for 2 years. Full-time training looks like training 2 or 3 times every day, twice in the water in the morning, and then a third session in the gym or on the rowing machine. It is a whole lifestyle, so no weekends, no lie-ins. It's full on. The whole point of training, pushing your body to its limits in training and racing. And the rowing lifestyle really dictates everything: nutrition, sleep, hydration, the schedule, and the focus to improve and be successful is the main focus. And it came to the selection for Sydney. So this was, I'd finished school in 1998. So my aim was to go to Sydney to tick that Olympic box and then become a veterinary surgeon. And selection for Sydney, I actually came second in the race off with a single slot, which meant that I didn't make it. I hadn't made it. And actually, as a 20-year-old, that was the lowest point in my life as a sports person and a 20-year-old that I'd ever felt, that I'd ever gotten to. And I really felt like I'd wasted 2 years of my life. I really questioned God in that time, thinking that what a waste and what a mistake I'd made by pursuing rowing for those 2 years. And it took my coach really to pick me back up and say, look, come on, you've trained hard, you've reached a good standard. Maybe it's not where you wanted to be, but you've reached a good standard. You're not going to Sydney, but you can do other things this year. You can do the under-23 World Championships, and also you can do Henry Royal Regatta, which is, in the rowing world, is a really big event. So I kind of picked myself back up and reluctantly did those events. But actually, at the end of that season, that year went from being a disaster year to one of the highlights of my 15-year rowing career. It was such a light bulb moment for me, both in my sport and in my faith at that time. I actually ended up winning the under-23s in my single and also Henry Royal Regatta, and realised that actually it wasn't the end of my career like I'd decided, but it was actually the beginning, it was the start. God had plans and they were very different to mine, but they were actually better, more than I could have ever imagined. And it was at that point, really, in 2000, that summer, that I looked back over those 2 years and could see, and sometimes it's only in hindsight, isn't it, that we can see what God's doing in our lives. But I could see how God had led me and guided me and placed people in my path with so many blessings that at the time I hadn't really recognised. And that absolute realisation of God in my life in that moment, really the Bible passage for me that really struck me at the time and I kind of held on to since through the ups and downs is a passage in Proverbs that says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your paths. I realise that God actually has my life in his hands as a Christian and that I could trust him with it through the unknowns and through the ups and downs. And, God gives us lifelines, doesn't he? People, paths. I'm sure we could all name people God has put into our lives to bless us. And, I thought that I was going to row for 2 years and become a veterinary surgeon. But actually, God's plans were different. I ended up rowing for 15 years and becoming a prison officer. Totally different. And now I'm working alongside other Christian sports people, encouraging them in their faith and their sports. God knows us better than we know ourselves. I mean, even within that, if you'd have said to me, Debbie, if you go on that rowing machine or if you go in a boat, you're going to now be rowing for 15 years full time, I would have said, no way. Who wants to do that? Why would I want to do that? That wasn't my plan. That wasn't what I wanted to do. But actually, God knew that would be, yes, tough and challenging, but it would be an amazing blessing. Exactly the same for the prison work that I did for 9 years. If you'd have said to me, Debbie, if you go and do that assembly, it's going to lead to you being a prison officer. I'd have said, no way. Who wants to do that? I wouldn't want to do that. But actually, God knew that that would be an amazing place for me to be and to learn and to be a blessing. So, for me, I have an absolute trust that God does know what's best for me better than I know myself. But, I've mentioned about God already a number of times, but let me just briefly explain how I myself came to faith. Again, just taking you back to the beginning. So I grew up in a Christian home. My grandparents were missionaries in Liberia and Africa. And as from birth, I would have been going to church, and I grew up in a Christian home. So if you'd have asked me when I was a young teenager, Debbie, do you believe in God? Are you a Christian? I would have said, yes, I go to church and my family are Christians, because at that point I thought that being a Christian was automatic. That it was just an automatic thing because I went to church and because I was in a Christian family. Now, I would say that, as that young teenager, I did genuinely believe that God existed. And I hope that none of you listening would believe that you're just a bag of chemicals. We are precious. We know this, don't we? Life is precious. It's why we cry when people pass away and when terrible things happen to people. It's why we have joy when things go well for people, because life has value. And I knew as a youngster that life had value because God says so, and he made us. And I also genuinely believed that God makes and blesses us all with abilities and talents and passions. And each of us are individuals, and those things are different: passions, abilities, talents. And I knew that part of that for me was sport. I knew that God had blessed me with sport and that passion for it. But as a youngster, sport was my life. I was happy just to take that blessing and get on with my own life. And I mentioned at the beginning about some of the ways and some of the attitudes and some of the selfishness that I had as a youngster. And I was quite happy just to use sport for that as well. But then I joined a youth group at church when I was 15, and a dear lady called Jennifer faithfully spoke about Jesus. And I started to really listen to who Jesus was, the life he lived, and why he came to the earth, and how he died for me. And I suddenly realized that, yes, God creates us with purpose and ability, but first and foremost, he made us to be in relationship with him. So at this point, when I was 15, I realized my personal need for Jesus. Now, none of us could say that we're perfect, could we? That we never say or think a wrong thing, that we don't get annoyed with our kids or grumpy with our friends. None of us could say that there aren't times when we've forgotten about God, or perhaps we'd even say we've lived life totally without him. And I had certainly gone my own way, and life was all about me. And all of this breaks our relationship with God that we were born to have, that we were created to have. And, God could have very much decided to leave the world to it and say, oh, well, never mind, they haven't chosen me, and leave them to it. But, God knows that life and love and all good things actually come from him, both now and in eternity. And he loves us too much. He doesn't want us to be cut off from that. And I understood and realized at that time, when I was 15, that he'd made a way for us to turn back to him and to know him by sending Jesus. Jesus showed us what God is like, showing his love, his faithfulness. But then Jesus also died in our place. God can forgive us and accept us by us accepting Jesus into our lives. So, my rejection of God has separated me from him. But Jesus has showed me that even though I rejected God, if I turn back to him, he gives new life. So instead of living life on my own, I could live life with God. And I would say this was the point at 15 years old when I became a Christian. My own choice, realizing what God had done for me, realizing my need for Jesus, being sorry for rejecting him, being extremely thankful, and asking Jesus to come and live in my life. So, being a Christian is not automatic. You can't earn it or be good enough. None of us are good enough. It was simply a gift from God. And, I am so grateful that this was God's timing for me to get to know him. That timing, actually really before I went into that crazy world of sport, because, my faith was a huge anchor and stability as I went through this intensive path of rowing, training and racing. And God has taught me so much. And, just because I was a Christian, certainly didn't take away my competitiveness. I was one of the most competitive people in the team. Yet Jesus teaches us to live with integrity, with compassion, and loving others, which, is challenging in the selfish world that sport can often be. So, God has grown me in maturity in this area through the ups and downs, learning to look out for and encourage others, even though, they were my competition for places. Within our team, we're competing against each other for about 8 months of the year before we're put into boats to then go out and compete against the rest of the world. So really tricky kind of dynamic that you have to train and work within. And yes, I was motivated, of course, to win medals and to do well, but I was also motivated not to waste the abilities and opportunities that God had given me. So, for me, I love running. I passionately embraced life. But also as a Christian, I wanted to honour God in how I did that. And, that was at times really challenging. But I would say, faith and my personal relationship with Jesus is exactly that. It's a relationship. And as you walk over time, that relationship grows. And God taught me and teaches all of us more about who he is and who we are. And of course, being a Christian didn't mean that my life was suddenly smooth and rosy and everything fell into place. I faced the same ups and downs as everyone else did in my sports. I wasn't immune to the emotions of the highs and the lows and the disappointments. But, the difference is that God was with me in it. Faith isn't a crutch, as some people might think, that we just cling to it when we need help. Of course, God is certainly faithful in those times, strengthening us to get through, but he's also in the joys and the changes. And perspective for me was a big thing. One of the most significant things that God showed me, I would say, through my rowing journey, was that actually as a Christian, my identity, so who I was, had changed, and now was firmly in him as a child of God, accepted back into his family. So let me just explain a bit. If we think about, what does our culture say about who we are? Really, what are the lies that we have come to believe? And as I mentioned some of these, perhaps for each of you listening, think about which of these maybe resonates with you. So, I am what I have. I am what I do. I am what others think about me. I am what I think about myself. I am nothing more than my worst moments. I am nothing less than my best moments. These are all lies. Actually, our value and our identity is deeper than this. Rowing was just something that I did. It wasn't who I was. And, if we build our value and identity on these things, then it will always be unstable. We'll always be trying to be someone. So I saw and experienced myself in sport, which is so consuming that athletes and myself, that I wrestled with, constantly putting our identity in successes. So if we were winning, or if athletes are winning, then you can feel like you're on top of life, that you're in the right place, that everything's, falling into plan as it should. But then if you're losing, you can feel like you're a failure and, that your value is less. And of course, we all know that you can go from hero to zero in sport overnight in a disappointment or in a bad result. And, I experienced those things as well. I'd won an amazing silver in Athens in 2004 that was absolutely incredible, an amazing experience. But then when we won a silver in Beijing 4 years later, we'd hoped for more. We'd hoped to be Olympic champions. And actually this result has deeply affected my crew in various ways. With some of my crew, with that leading to them feeling like deep failures as individuals. We probably all heard or read in the press in recent years about athletes speaking out about when they finish their sports, when they come out of their full-time sport as elite athletes, that they suddenly really struggle. And they ask questions like, who are they? Who are they? Where's their purpose? What is their value now that they're not sports people? And I'm sure each one of us know that, people's views and opinions of us can change, can't they, from day to day. So for me, when I was a sports person, people's views of me changed depending on my results, whether I was winning or losing, whether I was successful or not. And, I wanted to believe my coaches. I wanted to be good enough to be selected. I wanted to be good enough for the crew. And we're often trying to be good enough for people in our families, in our jobs, in our sports. And actually how precious we are to other people can vary, can't it, depending on a number of factors. But really God showed me that what he says is what counts. And he says that we're precious, full stop. And his view is unchanging. My results don't define who I am. This is what I learned through my journey through sport. Actually, God defines who I am. And as a Christian, I know that my identity, who I am, is not fundamentally in what others say about me. My identity and value is unchanging as a child of God. And, our lives, my life and your life, is valuable enough for God to give up his most precious son, Jesus, to make a way for us to come back into relationship with him. God's view of us and love for us never changes, whether we mess up, win, lose, wherever we're at. God looks at us and says, you desperately need me, whether you know it or not, and my love for you will never change. Here I stand, waiting for you to turn to me so that I can change and restore your life. And for me, even as a Christian, I need reminding of that great truth. And that's why God places people around us. It's why it's such a blessing to be part of a loving church community where God's word and truth is faithfully preached and people learn to love each other as we learn of how much God loves us. And so it's been a real blessing. It's been a real journey of ups and downs. Where am I now? Well, because of the rowing successes came opportunities to mentor in schools, and as I work with youngsters who are struggling in both schools and people referral units, I felt God really pulling my path towards working with young people to help them recognise their potential and lift their eyes away from labelling themselves as hopeless. My life path then changed, and I was involved in the prison service for 9 years, first as a volunteer and then becoming a prison officer, initially working with 15 to 18-year-old males, and then as we re-rolled, adult males. And of course, being a prison officer was a very varied role, but within those different roles even, God was teaching me, and I had the opportunity to get to know hundreds of people through my time, different individuals with different needs, different backgrounds, different attitudes. And I found that in this time, each individual did have capacity and worth and skills and abilities. But, for the majority of people that I came across, they didn't believe that change was possible and couldn't picture a future any different to the life they left. But I know, and as a Christian, I've seen that God is in the business of changing lives for the better. And, I've experienced myself that really by his work of the Spirit, that he has shown me my worth and purpose. And he's still in the process of mending my brokenness, giving me boundaries, bringing restoration. And it has been a privilege and an honour to represent my country in rowing for 15 years. But, it's an even greater privilege and honour to know Jesus in my life, not just from when I pass away, but for life now. That is the most important decision I ever made. And from that 7-year-old troubled youngster, God gave me a lifeline and has changed my selfish heart to be more outward looking, to love others better. Of course, I'm not perfect. I still make mistakes and mess up. But God is always at work. Even now, he wants me to know that lives are precious and valuable. And actually, he loves me too much to leave me where I am now, but wants to continue drawing me closer to him to see his love more deeply and myself more clearly. So to wrap up, really, looking back over my life, I can see that God has called me to know him away from a very damaging path that I could have walked, and then use my life experiences through the rowing and through the sport and through the prisons to draw me closer to knowing the reality of him in my life and to learn both his character and love, as well as my constant need for him. So I'm full of thanks and so grateful to God that he gave me the gift of Jesus, that he loved me too much to leave me to walk my life journey without him, but allowed me to see my need, to turn to him and ask Jesus to lead, guide and bring restoration to my life. So I know that as a Christian I have a totally different perspective to the world, which gives me so much more, not just because I can enjoy the good things of life, but also that I can enjoy God, who's the giver of those good things. So if you're listening today and have not yet taken that step of faith in Jesus, then perhaps I can encourage you to take the time over these next few days maybe to pause and to reflect on what God says about you and about what Jesus offers you. Not someone else, but you. Your individual life is so precious to God. He did not and does not give up on you. You don't need to be good enough. God just waits for you to respond and accept the gift of a real relationship with Jesus, which you were created for. So I'll just finish with a verse from the Bible that most of you will maybe have heard of before. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that whoever believes in him will not die, but have eternal life. Jesus came to give life to the full, and I pray that each of you listening today would know the reality of that more and more each day. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Debbie. That's so encouraging. If you would like to share your testimony on Social Church, we'd love to hear from you. Please get in contact via our website www.wearesocialchurch.com. We'd love to talk to you. We'd love to record your testimony and hear about how God has changed your life. Thanks a lot for listening today. Bye for now.